Sure. Matthew Lee, Intercity Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for the briefing and for your work. I wanted to, I mean, on this issue of migrants, I wanted to know whether, what you can say about some of the programs or militias that Italy and others in the EU are funding to stop migration, and whether you think that some of these, constitute a human rights problem. I also wanted to know, I know that the foreign minister of the Philippines recently met with Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and although the UN refused to give a readout, at least initially, he said that he'd raised your report on the Philippines or visit to the Philippines, that issues concerning you had been raised. They always tell us that the special rapporteurs are entirely independent from the Secretariat. I just wanted to know whether it's your understanding that this was raised to the Secretary General and what you could say about that. And finally, I wanted to know if you're aware of the situation in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon, where recently, in response to what's viewed as a secessionist or desire for a referendum, many protesters have not only been imprisoned, but also killed, some from helicopter gunships. And I think the Secretary General's visiting the President of the country today, but doesn't seem to. I just want to know if you view that as within your mandate in terms of the targeting of people that are protesting, even if you call them secessionists. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with regard to the first questions about the EU and Italy deal, as my report details, one aspect of the deterrence policy is a policy of extraterritoriality, meaning that governments push their physical borders away from the national borders of the country and call on other states to take the responsibility of preventing refugees and migrants from entering their territory. It is in that context that I analyze the current attempt to make a deal between the European Union and Italy on one hand, the Libyan government on the other. I think we're talking of something to the extent of 46 million euro, which will be geared to provide Libya with the tools to undertake search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean and detain migrants and refugees in a humane fashion and do a range of other related activities. My position, which I have discussed in the report and elsewhere, is that in the current situations, in the current context, I do not find it plausible that Libya is able to prevent or respond to people wanting to leave the country in a human rights protective fashion. I just have everything I have read, every information that has been communicated to me indicate that at the moment, given the current situation in Libya, neither the national authorities nor the groups allied to them are in a position to respond humanely to the situations. We have repeated allegations and some evidence of gross ill treatment of refugees and migrants, including in official detention centers, but also in unofficial detention centers. There are allegations that militias which were not initially involved in the relationship in that deal are now seeking to get involved. That creates far greater tension on the ground. There has been, I have documented examples where the ill-prepared, ill-trained Libyan Coast Guard have shot at and not necessarily responded adequately to boats that they encountered. I have made it clear that I believe that the Italian Coast Guard should be trained. You know, I believe that the institutions in Libya should be strengthened so that they can respond and treat people adequately. But I also think there needs to be guarantees before we rely on Libya to undertake those responsibilities. And at the moment, the guarantees are simply not there, which means that while continuing to supporting Libyan institutions and authorities, we also need to keep migrants and refugees and to offer search and rescue from the standpoint of Europe. It's not, as long as the situation in Libya is not adequate, as long as the support from Europe, the training is not delivering the necessary level of skills to undertake this kind of responsibilities, Europe must keep receiving refugees and migrants through its search and rescue operations. More generally, we need to put in place a system that allows, of course, refugees, asylum seekers to have access to international protections. So it is, in the current context, I believe, and I've said so in my report, there could be allegations or there could be a case made that the European Union or Italy may be aiding and assisting in massive human rights violations. There is customary international law to that effect. It is detailed in my report. I can give you the page if you want. It's page 10 and 11. I am not saying this is the case. I'm just saying we are really edging here, and they should take good notice of that, those responsibilities under customary law. So regarding the meeting of the ambassador of the MFA of the Philippines with the SG, like you, I have received through the press, actually, the Filipino media has reported that my case had been raised by the MFA. I believe as well that there was a press release from the Filipino Ministry of Foreign Affairs released about the complaints raised by the minister regarding my behavior and my work as a special rapporteur, which has, so that's how much I know. I do not know how the Secretary General would have responded to those allegations. I hope he would have just said, she's just doing her job.
Do you think it would, just one follow-up, do you think it would have been, as a special rapporteur, is this a case in which it might have been good for the Secretary General to actually issue his own readout of the meeting, since the government, I mean, in the past, the previous Secretary General used to read out all meetings. This one doesn't, but when a government issues that type of a readout saying, we made all these points, we scored these points, do you think the UN itself should say, here's what we said, or?
Well, certainly they could have said, they should have said it to me, as a first step. In view of the report from one of my colleagues, a special rapporteur on freedom of expression, who, as you know, has just issued a report on the transparency of international organizations, I will tend to say that it will be good practice for this kind of information to be released. Otherwise, my response to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, if he had approached me directly, would have been to refer him back to the Code of Conduct, and to the steps I am taking to ensure that I implement my mandate in the most transparent, impartial, and unbiased fashion, that they have not been able to provide with any evidence of misbehavior, except for the fact that I am reported allegations of extrajudicial executions. They have also tended to be very polemical rather than engage with the substance of my allegations, and that to me is a problem for me, certainly, but it's a problem for the allegations themselves, which require an active engagement rather than, trying to polemic over them. I forgot the third
It
question.
was about, I'm not sure if you're aware of the situation.
Oh, yes,
This thing in
Cameroon. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. It's absolutely part of my mandate. The nature and the motivations of the Cameroonian or any other people does not impact on the fact that their right to life must be protected, except in situations, of course, where individuals engaged in violent activities. And even under those circumstances, the response on the part of the state should be proportionate and necessary in terms of the use of force. So the motivations does not impact on whether or not I can respond to their arbitrary deprivation of life. I am fully aware of what's happening in Cameroon. For protocol reasons, I cannot elaborate much, but there is ongoing discussions and communication.
It just came to mind as you were talking about this. There was a pretty well reported, at least, incident in which migrants between Yemen and Somalia were killed by helicopter gunships, the people attributed to the Saudi-led coalition. Is that, I mean, that seems to be directly, this was actually, maybe it wasn't by the smugglers, but it was by some military force. Yes. Whatever happened with that? Was there ever, to your knowledge, was anyone held accountable for killing those refugees?
Now, I'm always having some doubt as to the time frame. I'm looking at my colleagues because I did raise this particular case, but I don't know yet whether I have received a reply. But that will be one example, of course, but that was taking place in a specific international humanitarian context.
I'm asking because the UN has recently said that the Saudi-led coalition has taken positive steps. It's no longer on the, quote, bad child killers list, but the good child killers list in the Children in Armed Conflict mandate. And so obviously their response, if you did ask, maybe there's some way to find out how they responded, whether they actually took...
Yeah.
Okay.
Eventually, I'll be, if you give me your contact details, as soon as, I can go public with any kind of response, then I will absolutely share it.